Ludwig Goransson composed the score for Tenet. I'm Riley Chow of Cold Derby. Now, director Christopher Nolan has worked with Hans Zimmer for his last seven films, but he was unavailable this time, so you came in. So he's done, some really iconic work, especially with that wow sound effect. So I'm wondering, how much did you seek to emulate his work with this project?
Well, I've been a fan of Christopher Nolan's and Hans Zimmer and everything they've done for film for a long time. I remember seeing, I think it was Batman Begins, as I was like 20 something, and I saw it in the theater in Stockholm, and I remember it so clearly because it was like one of the few moments when I've been in a theater and it really feels like an experience. It feels like an event. You're there. The music is loud. The music is almost like it's its own character in the movie. In fact, in all of Christopher Nolan's films, the music is very present and has a very distinct character. So obviously, getting the chance to work with Chris Nolan on has been a dream of mine, and just to get an insight in his mind and how his thought process works and how he thinks about music was extremely interesting. And the first time we met, I went over to his house, and I don't know what he wanted to talk about, but we sat down and just ended up chatting for about 6 hours, just like listening to music. He was playing me music from his, like, what inspired him and his career, and it was just a great time. We kind of bonded, and then by then in the meeting, it was like, hey, do you want to come in tomorrow and read the script for my new film? So that was the beginning of the whole process.
Yeah, I understand that you started recording, shortly thereafter, and you recorded a bunch before there was actually anything shot. So I'm wondering, how did the sound change from those initial sessions that you did versus, what we ended up seeing?
So I got started very early because at the script stage, when he finished the script, I went in and I read it. Took about 4 or 5 hours to read the script, and immediately after we had a creative conversation. This was about 5 months before they actually shot the film. So, which is great because that's when Chris is in pre-production. So he's in town, he's available, and he's available to me. So right after we finished the script, we had a talk, and I talked about my impression, and about inversion, and how many, what all the opportunities is that you can experiment with that theme. And another conversation we had was just also, which I think is very interesting, because Chris Nolan's also very aware of the technology in cinema. And if you think about the last 40 years, when you go to a theater and sit down, there hasn't been a lot of change in terms of what you're watching. You're watching a big screen, but every 5-10 years, the sound gets better. The audio quality, the speakers, the surround, Dolby Atmos surround. So he's very involved in the evolution of sound. And something that I thought was very interesting from our early conversations was just how we can experiment with different frequencies, and really bring out everything, all the music to the maximum capacity of frequency sounds, and higher and low sounds, and give the audience an experience they never had before. So with that as a start, I set off to start experimenting, start writing music, and I was just in my studio for 5 months, and we kind of worked like every 2 weeks. I was writing like a bunch of music, and every 2 weeks I went in to meet with Chris. We sat down. I played him my songs. I played him the demos. I played him my what I've got out from our conversations, and we kind of sat down and dissected every little piece of music, every little sound. And Chris had ideas of what sound could be tied to what character, and what theme could be tied to different characters. And then we kind of just evolved. We built a DNA. We built a sound world for Tenet from the ground up. So when he took off the shoot, they went to Tallinn first. They shot the movie in 7 different countries on 3 different continents. When's that gonna happen again? But when he took off the shoot, he had about 2 hours of music in his iPod, and he was listening to that constantly. And I would get a phone call every now and then. He called me from Tallinn. He was like, "Hey, I'm listening to this one piece of music we've been working on. I'm shooting this scene now, the terrorist attack at the opera house, and I'm listening to this track, and like, I feel this would be great for this moment." And like maybe 3 minutes into the track, can you like add some distortion because the terrorists are coming in? And I didn't think I mean, I got those notes and I started changing the music, and I didn't think that much more of it until like 4 months later when they came back to start editing the film. And he called me over. He's like, "Hey, you want to see the first scene of the film?" Which is called the prologue, because that had to be finished first, because that prologue came out in, as a kind of like a teaser trailer in front of Star Wars in December last year. So I sat down, didn't know what to expect, and I saw this incredible first scene of the film with my music playing in the background, and it was like jaw dropping for me. It was like almost like he filmed the scene with the music playing in his head.
You started working on, sitcoms and indie films. Lately, you've been doing these big blockbusters. So how does it manifest for you, like in the score department, working with, a $200 million budget for the film overall?
Well, I love the opportunity when you can get involved very early. You know, on on the sitcoms and on TV, like the schedule is crazy. You know, you have a certain amount of time to finish every week, and you have to write, 30, 40 minutes a week. So the schedule can get very intense. And what I love working on these bigger movies is, especially if you get some leeway and you have a lot of time. You know, for on Tenet, it took about 18 months. We worked on the score for about 18 months together. And and it gives me the time, and it gives me the opportunity to just sit down and fully dive into a project and sit for 1.5 years with just that music and those visuals in front of me.
You mentioned character themes. I wanted to ask about Robert Pattinson's character specifically, because he's kind of moving, in a different timeline. I guess they all are, but his kind of stands out. So I'm wondering what you did to distinguish the themes that you had for his character.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you're saying. Like the movement of his character through timeline is it's very interesting, and you don't fully understand it until you watch the movie the second time. And to really capture that way that he's moving in the timeline, we came up with the concept that it came out of one of our early conversations, and I was telling Chris, because when you're inverting music, if you want something to sound the same forwards and backwards, the sound needs to start in the same capacity. It needs to have the same attack in the beginning and in the end, because then you can turn it around and it'll sound the same. And so how to achieve that effect, and one way to achieve that effect is I started remembering one of the first ways I started feel like I was making music. I was probably like 5 or 6 years old, and I was sitting by my parents' stereo and listening to the radio. I was just sitting with the volume knob like up and down like this. And we're talking about that effect, how I really enjoy that. And it's kind of sad because kids these days, there's no volume knobs anymore. You press up and down on the speaker, or you have buttons, right? And if you sit with it with stereo and have the volume knob going this up and down in the same kind of movement, if you take that sound and reverse it, it'll sound the same depending on what note it is. If it's just one steady note and one chord coming in, if you go up and down like this, you can reverse it and it'll sound the same. So that was kind of the origin of Robert Pattinson's theme. It's chords played by strings, and I had to processing it through a volume knob going up and down, and it's like it almost sounds like waves coming up and down. And depending on Robert Pattinson, where he is in the timeline, it's either played forwards or backwards.
So you came up with Ryan Coogler and with Childish Gambino. You'd worked on Community, so you met him, and Ryan Coogler you've known, I think 14 years or something. So I'm wondering, and now you've gone on to win your Oscar, your Grammys with them. I'm wondering if there's a key moment in your past where you think like, oh, if like that hadn't happened, like I wouldn't have been on this path at all.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in life in general, like relationships is the most important part of, of your life and of the human's experience. And having those kind of relationships really made me grow as a person, but also as a professional and as a musician. And having a relationship with or a collaborator that you're working with. I started working with Ryan when we were about 20, I don't know, 25, 20, 24. And at that time, it's just the two of us working in my little dorm room at USC, and we were sitting together with headphones. I was playing him my music for his little short film, 5-minute short film with no dialogue. It was just score and sound effects. And it felt like that experience and those memories and like creating things that we never done before and finding things together and like those kind of is so important and we we've continued those feelings and those emotions through our relationship and through our collaborations through the years. So even though we're working on like $250 million Black Panther film, it still feels we can still connect to that feeling when we were 20 years old, sitting in our dorm like writing music and creating a short film. It still feels, we still feel the same kind of magic.
Yeah, so you won the Oscar for Black Panther, you won the Emmy for The Mandalorian, you have your Grammys for This Is America, and Black Panther. So that means that you're only missing the Tony to achieve the EGOT, which only 16 people ever have. So how much is that on your mind and what are you doing about it?
Well, right now I can't really do anything about it because I think Broadway is closed, right? So, but I haven't fully put that much thought into how to achieve the EGOT. But I love opera, I love Broadway, I love theaters, and maybe someday when I get the opportunity to work with someone I really love in that field, that will happen. But not within the next couple of years, I don't think.
I want to ask about Judas and the Black Messiah, because I was watching that film, and then at the end, in the end credits, I was like, oh, there you are, executive music producer through Proximity. So what was your role in that film?
Yeah, so I'm a part of Ryan Coogler's Proximity Media, and I'm kind of like I said, music executive of that production company, and it's extremely interesting, and I'm so grateful to be part of that of this production company, because I think everything that Ryan and Seb, who's also part of the team, and Zinzi, are involved in, and everything we're creating at the moment is just feels right in time, and I loved the movie. Like it's one of my favorite movies of this year, and just to be part of it was extremely exciting, and even though my role was as a composer or a songwriter for this film, I still kept in touch with everyone part of the project, and gave it notes or advice if I could, or help the process to be smoother, and even though it was a smooth process, but it's kind of a new role for me, and I'm very proud to be part of Proximity.
Yeah, in the past year, you've been working very differently than the way you were before. I'm wondering, are there any advantages to the current circumstances in terms of composing?
In terms of my career,
No, I mean like in these COVID times where you can't actually, assemble like a live orchestra, are there any, hidden advantages, things that you like better about the way things are being done these days?
oh, the advantages of the pandemics.
Yeah.
It's tough to think about the advantages. I think the advantage is definitely that you get to spend more time with your family. I mean, I moved my studio home for a little bit when we were finishing Tenet. The finishing, we had about 20% more score to do while the pandemic hit. So it was very strange times. I had to move my studio back to my house. I moved it into my bedroom. We moved the bedroom into the living room. We just had a baby, so the baby was sitting right next to our bedroom when I was working. I also had speakers on really loud, but he's fine. But it's definitely, in some of the ways we had to go about recording the score, because we had a lot of music finished with a live orchestra when we recorded the Tenet, and this was early March last year, so we had to figure out a new way how to score this film, and kind of we experimented with recording every musician by themselves at their house, and so we had to give recording equipment to every musician. It was probably 50, 60 musicians. And we had to go around and give them sheet music. And then we had to take the recordings and line them up one by one, so they all sounded like they were playing in the same room together. And that was the challenge, because it was a lot of work for my team. And the sound of it, you're never going to get a traditional orchestra sound coming out of recording people like that, because an orchestra is kind of like an organ. Everyone has to be in the room and breathe and play together and look at each other. But the way that it came out, actually, from everyone sitting separate and recording their parts separate, was actually really fitting for the experimental sound of the Tenet score. So it was actually a really cool experiment, and it was a very fitting sound and audio experience that came out of recording musicians that way.
All right, Ludwig. Well, thanks very much for taking the time to chat. We have many other interviews with Oscar contenders on our YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing what you have coming out next.
Thanks so much, Riley. Thanks for having me.